Welcome, everyone, to this first episode of our new season of the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, well, it's a big weekend for Bonnie Crombie as the Ontario Liberals will render their judgment on her leadership at the big Liberal confab.
The Ontario PC Party's polling numbers are astonishingly high. What's behind that?
And we'll catch you up on the events of over the summer, including bike lanes, the 401 tunnel, and Ontario public servants returning to the office 5 days a week.
And in your column, my column, I will look at an area where Doug Ford could be leading and isn't.
And I'll focus on a politician who was, well, like no other. He was in the federal cabinet. He ran for the leadership of his party. Oh, and he also won 6 Stanley Cups in 8 years and ended up in the Hockey Hall of Fame. We remember the iconoclastic Ken Dryden.
It's Friday, September 12th, 2025. Let's get to it.
That was really good. You did all of that with no teleprompter at all. Well done.
We'll see how the rest of it goes.
Let's see. Hey, give me some sugar. It's been a long time, pal. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, sir.
A quick summer update. What'd you do?
Mostly was working. I took a little bit of time off right after the school year started, after my kid went into school. Took a week off just to do some me stuff around the house. How about yourself?
Manitoulin Island.
Yes.
Which, of course, is wired now. And I probably worked 12 to 14 hours every day while I was up there. So I worked all summer long, but it's a glorious spot to work, so it doesn't feel like work.
I would be sympathetic about the workload, except you were working for Manitoulin, so I get no sympathy from me.
No, I don't. I'm not looking for sympathy. And of course, in the weeks ahead, I will start to roll out the Manitoulin Island T-shirts
yes.
and some other new stuff that we've got coming along as well. Now, I see your love of Star Trek is still all over your chest today. What's that all about?
So the other thing that happens in the summer is Fan Expo, the big sort of comic and science fiction and fantasy convention here in Toronto. And my wife is a regular attendee. And she picked up a few T-shirts, which will be making their appearance on the podcast. But I thought to get things started with our new season, I would wear Jean-Luc Picard shouting, "There are 4 lights," which people who know Star Trek The Next Generation will know this is a very famous episode where he's being tortured and he's being forced to acknowledge that there are 5 lights being shone directly into his face when there are, in fact, only 4 lights. And it's about making him lose his grip on reality. And I mean, I liked the shirt because I like the shirt and because I'm a big Star Trek nerd. But then I thought, it is also one of the objects of journalism to insist that, you know, the facts are the facts, real things are real things, and we don't knowingly say things that are false, even if it is easier to go along to do so. And so I am taking this little moment to get the intersection of both my love of science fiction and my chosen profession to start the season.
That is a beautiful message, actually. Now, of course, I recognize that because I'm a Star Trek fan as well.
Yes.
And yes, I mean, the message of the series, and that episode in particular, is the power of the human spirit to maintain its grip on reality, which the captain of the Enterprise D does. But this also extends into journalism and into political life nowadays. Yeah, good. That's a good message.
If I could, from a different episode, one of the best Jean-Luc Picard lines, the first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth.
Ah, beautiful. Okay, if you go for a third one, you're out of control. Are we stopping now?
All right, pumping the brakes, pumping the brakes.
Okay, good. Well, I am choosing this T-shirt to wear this week because it was 38 years ago this week that David Peterson, who was the 20th Premier of Ontario, won the biggest majority government in Ontario history. 95 out of 130 seats at Queen's Park. It was really a massive win. And I wanted to wear this shirt for a reason, just as you have. And that is, I remember former Premier Peterson once telling me, the only thing people ever remember about you is how you went out, right? And he went out bad, right? After winning the biggest majority in Ontario history, 3 years later, he called what turned out to be an ill-advised early election call. He lost to Bob Rae in the NDP in a shocking upset. And in his view, and I don't know if he's right or wrong, but in his view, it tends to be that the only thing people remember about him is that he called the early election and lost. Yeah. And I guess I'm wearing this T-shirt as a sort of a modest little attempt to remind people that in 1985, this guy also was at the helm of what turned out to be the end of the 42-year-long Conservative dynasty, which had lasted from 1943, which I think was the year he was born, to 1985. So his whole life, he had only lived under Tory governments in Ontario. And then, of course, with Bob Rae's help in that minority parliament of 1985, they overthrew the Tories, kicked them out of office after 42 years, and became the first Liberal premier since Harry Nixon in 1943. 2 years later, the biggest majority government of all time. So let's also put those things on the record because they're part of the story. We shouldn't just remember the downfall. Let's remember the whole story.
Absolutely.
So there we go. Okay, what else we got? Anything else?
No, let's get to issue 1.
All right, let's do that. Off to issue 1 it is. We are recording this episode on Friday, September 12th, which is the first day of the Ontario Liberals' annual general meeting in downtown Toronto. The main event is a leadership review of Leader Bonnie Crombie, who, of course, was unable to win a seat in Mississauga during last February's provincial election. JMM, give us a sense of what's on the Liberals' agenda this weekend.
Right, so this is the major question before the members of the Liberal Party this weekend. There are some other issues that they're going to talk about. Obviously, there are some amendments to the party constitution that they're going to debate. But the main item that we are all focused on is this question of should Bonnie Crombie be retained as leader? And it's going to be a test for her leadership, obviously, and a real question that the Liberal Party itself is going to have to answer as well, right? She took over as the leader in 2023. She won the leadership contest that fall, not that long ago in the
grand scheme of things.
Exactly. Thank you. In the grand scheme of things, it's less than 2 years, right? So if she loses this vote, or doesn't even win an outright majority, then that's not just, it doesn't just reflect on her, obviously, but it also reflects on the party's choice, right? To go from the winner to rejected in under 2 years, it raised the question of, well, what were you thinking 2 years ago, right? There has been made public a campaign debrief, a postmortem, if you like, a look at what went wrong in the most recent election campaign. The party did win 5 more seats, and they increased their vote share.
So they have official party status at Queen's Park now?
Yes, exactly. But when you compare the results of this most recent election to some of the promises that Crombie and the people around her were making, certainly when she won 2 years ago, or even 6 months before the election, when they were hoping that they could win 20, 25 seats, just narrowly clearing the threshold to be in a recognized party in the legislature, certainly did not meet the promises that were made.
Yeah, I think a lot of Liberals are frustrated right now because they've come third in 3 consecutive elections. How many times has that happened in Ontario history?
0.
Answer 0. You are correct. Yeah, it's never happened before. So you can understand their frustration. In fairness to Bonnie Crombie, she was really unlucky in this election. I mean, let's face it, she came second in the total vote with 30% of the total vote. But because of the way the vote split, she got very few seats for that 30% of the vote, whereas the NDP only got 18% of the vote, but their vote was much more efficient, and as a result, they got far more seats, I think almost twice as many seats as the Liberals did. So, but you know what? Them's the rules, and that's how it goes. I want to get into some discussion with you about what a win really is, because technically, according to the Liberal Constitution, you need 50% plus 1 support to win and continue on as leader. But there's nobody who plays this game who believes that that's enough for her to hang on. So what's the number really that she needs to hit to hang on?
Well, this is the problem with let's say the unrealistic 50% plus 1 number being the one that's written down, is the actual answer is kind of squishy, right? I think most observers would say that, if she gets above 70, 75%, that kind of number, she's probably safe.
Oh, if you get a 7, if the first number's a 7, you're fine.
Yeah.
What if it's a 6?
Well, that's the question, right? So Crombie's most vocal critics within the party, a group called the New Leaf Liberals, they have organized themselves to try and see her unseated at this meeting. They have asked her to resign if she gets anything less than 2/3 support. Now, if she got 65%, let me rephrase that. If she got 67%, she would technically clear the threshold that the New Leaf Liberals have set for her. But you and I would both know that would be, in the historical context, still a rather weak result for a leader.
Well, can I jump in on that for a second? Because the reason you're saying that is because back in 1983, the federal leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, Joe Clark, got, I think, 66.9% of the vote at his leadership review, and he decided at that moment that that wasn't enough, and that therefore he was resigning. They were having a leadership convention, and he lost the next leadership convention to Brian Mulroney. I note with interest that the man who is today the King of England, when he saw Joe Clark the next time after that convention, asked him, so tell me, why exactly was 66.9% not enough? Because in doing so, he set a precedent for future candidates.
Yes.
And, 2/3 seems to me to be a pretty good number.
Right. I mean, twice as many people saying yes as no to your leadership, right? And yet, leaders, as we say, leaders have resigned for not clearing that that higher threshold. I think that if she does get, we've already said, if it starts with a 7, she's probably fine. If she gets that 68, 69%, it's probably fine. If she loses, meaning she gets less than the 50%.
Well, there's no discussion then.
No discussion. We go to a leadership contest, and basically it would be a campaign or a leadership campaign that the party would organize, much like they organized the last one. And interestingly, of course, Bonnie Crombie can run again if she decides that she wants to contest that result. And then there's this middle ground, and this is the really dangerous bit for the Ontario Liberal Party, where let's say she wins higher than 50% plus 1, but let's say less than 2/3 in that 50 to 65% range, where technically she's won and she's the leader, but I don't think anybody would say that the argument had ended, right? You would still have a substantial disaffected minority within her party who would frankly still be there and still be loudly agitating to say that she was not the right person to lead them into the next election.
Well, apropos of what you've just said, I was just checking it right now, and in fact, in 2022 in Alberta, Jason Kenney won his leadership review. He got 51.4%, which is technically a victory.
Yes.
And he, of course, right away announced that's not enough, and I'm going to stand down as leader of the party.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is Thomas Mulcair the
No, he lost.
Yeah, no, but this is what I mean. I think he's the only case I can think of in recent history where he just lost outright.
Exactly.
It's more common where a leader would win technically, but not quite clear that kind of arbitrary threshold we have in mind.
Do you remember who the federal NDP president was who had the unfortunate task for Mr. Mulcair of having to announce that he had failed to reach the 50% threshold?
I am blanking.
Her name was Marit Stiles.
Should have got that one.
The current leader of the Ontario NDP. Okay, so...
Well, I think the point I want to just make about that sort of squishy, uncertain possibility, at least, and obviously we don't know what the result is. We're not going to know until Sunday, I believe, afternoon. There's, I think, a very strong argument that what the party really wants is a clear result, right? A clear defeat, a clear victory for Crombie. Whatever, the clarity would be more valuable than the actual result itself. The worst case scenario is if it gets into that squishy middle that I talked about. Whether she prevails or not, the party still has work to do. If you read that post-mortem report that they put out this week, it talks about really needing to engage with the grassroots of the party, to rebuild a lot of the infrastructure at the riding level. Frankly, a lot of the advice is very similar to a report that was issued after the Del Duca defeat back in 2022. There's work that needs to be done that has not been done. So, that is going to be an uphill battle for the party, whoever the leader is at the end of things on Sunday. And it will be very difficult considering how popular Doug Ford is currently.
More on Doug Ford in a second. For what it's worth, I've sort of checked in with the Crombie camp, and they believe that they have worked hard in order to assure a solid victory. I think, now I'd want to, you know what, I did not check this before coming in here, but my recollection is, apropos of David Peterson winning a massive majority in 1987, and then, per the Constitution of the Liberal Party, going before the membership in the next general meeting after that, and submitting his leadership to the vagaries of the members, I think he only got about 75% support, despite winning the biggest majority government in Ontario history. Right. There is a very progressive, kind of left-wing faction within the Liberal Party that doesn't kind of like... They don't want the Liberal Party to be sort of more moderate than Crombie would like it to be. And, depending on how organized they get, they could make quite a stink for her on Sunday.
Well, and just to bring in even more of the historical perspective in, Dalton McGuinty in 2011 wins a very narrow minority, submits himself to a leadership review following that election, wins some very large fraction, I forget what the exact number was, and then several weeks later announces his resignation anyway because of events that had nothing to do with the internal politics of the Liberal Party. So you never know how events will turn.
Indeed. Okay, you mentioned Doug Ford a second ago, and let's follow up on that, and we'll do that coming right up now. Part of the leadership review of Bonnie Crombie noted that the Ontario Liberals allowed Doug Ford to, quote, define himself by calling an early election to fight Donald Trump. Ford did win a majority, his third consecutive, but there were some rumblings at Queen's Park that he thought he'd actually win more seats than he did. However, some recent polling suggests the Premier's party is doing just fine, thank you. You want to bring us up to scratch on that?
Right. There have been a few polls out recently, some showing as high as 53% of Ontario voters would cast their ballot for the Progressive Conservatives if an election were held today. The election is not being held today, but that is an incredibly high number given that he won in the February election with just 43% of the vote.
One of the things I find fascinating about that number is that, that's one polling organization. Yes. Another polling organization, the Angus Reid folks, they survey from time to time the popularity of all the premiers across the country. And on that score, how popular is your premier in your province? Yeah. Ford clocks in at 41%. He is the second least popular in all of Canada at the moment. The most popular premier in the country right now is Manitoba's Wab Kinew, a New Democrat. He's got 61% support. The most unpopular premier is Premier Legault in Quebec. He is only at 22%. What I find interesting is that despite the fact that the Conservatives are doing a pretty good job trying to brand Premier Ford as Captain Canada, taking on Donald Trump, you could argue the elbows are coming down federally, but Doug Ford, damn it all, is still handing it to Donald Trump every single time he can on American television and at press conferences here in Ontario. And yet, he's running, according to these polls, 12 points behind his own party. I'm not sure how that makes any sense, but that's what the numbers say.
Right. So you mentioned his fractious relationship with the President of the United States. Voters do seem to appreciate the combativeness and like, hey, it's smart politics to attack one of the least popular politicians in Canada right now, who happens to not be a politician in Canada, Donald Trump, right? You mentioned the difference between his popularity as premier and the potential vote share, running 12 points behind the party. I think one of the other elements to that is that, they are two different questions, right? And the question of who you will vote for is also tied in with what are your alternatives? And one reason why people might be willing to cast a vote for the PC party, even if they are not hugely fond of Doug Ford, is simply that, this goes back to what we were just saying about the Liberal Party, the opposition parties really have struggled to mount themselves as credible opposition in voters' minds.
Very true.
Just to stick with Trump and the topic of U.S. economic relations, Ford has also hit Prime Minister Carney for dropping some of the retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. Ford really striking a tougher line on tariffs, at least. Of course, Ontario has maintained its ban on U.S. booze in the LCBO.
Well, let me follow up on that,
yes.
Because as you and I both know, the Premier tends to hold a news conference, at least once, sometimes twice a week, which I think was a pace that he kept up for most of the summer. And he did something not too long ago on the issue of booze, yes, where the Premier called the company that owns the Crown Royal, that's it, Crown Royal whiskey brand, what do you call him? Dumb as a bag of hammers. Yes. He called the CEO of the company that. And a few fries short of a Happy Meal.
He's colorful.
He is, what's that other expression he always likes to use? Like the cheese is falling off the cracker, yes, with that guy?
Yes.
He's got all these little down-home spun expressions. This, of course, all relates to the fact that there's a whiskey plant down in southwestern Ontario in Amherstburg that this company has decided to close. That's 200 jobs in the province of Ontario that are disappearing. And the Premier held what turned into a very, entertaining / dramatic news conference last week. Let's have a look.
So this is what I think about Crown Royal. That's what they could do. And I think everyone else should do the same thing. I wish I could get this coming out quicker, but I'll stand here until it's all done. Anyways, folks.
Now, this is, in fairness to the Premier, obviously he wanted to do something very dramatic, which was take the top off that bottle and just have the contents splash out all over the place. And I guess whoever was staffing the event forgot to take the kind of very narrow spout off the top of the bottle. And as a result, the stuff just trickled out. And I mean, there's the poor Premier trying to make this dramatic exhibition of anger against this company, and it's just dribbling out bit by bit. He had to he probably spent 2-3 minutes there in front of the cameras waiting for it. Anyway, this Crown Royal, the company's called, what is it, Diageo? Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, okay. They got 500 employees all across Canada. So while the mothership is UK-owned, the whiskey is bottled here in Manitoba and Ontario and brewed in Quebec. And some of the criticism I have heard from the business community has been, look at Premier Ford, I understand that you're unhappy about the fact that jobs are disappearing in your province, but the reality is this is still a multinational company that is doing business in 2 other provinces. It wants to continue doing business in Canada. And the Premier of Ontario, maybe in the interest of national unity, ought to just tone it down a bit and not embarrass a company that's still employing a lot of people and wants to do business here. That's the thinking, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that this is not the only disappointing announcement from Diageo that we've had in the last little while. Last year, the company paused a plan to build a new distillery in, I believe, the Windsor region or St. Clair Township. They put that plan on hold. I think it's going to be a warehouse for now. This bottling plant announcement in Amherstburg followed that news. So there's been a few, negative decisions from Diageo, at least as far as Ontario is concerned. That said, and I think to your point, distillers, like, what are spirits made out of? They are made out of grains. Grains, water, and yeast, I guess. Distillers are, all of the big distillers are major customers for Ontario grain farmers. And the other argument that a company like Diageo or any of the big distillers can make is, like, whether we bottle the stuff here, or frankly, even if we distill the stuff here, we are still huge customers for Ontario's farmers, and we're still, good corporate players in that sense. We are helping to support rural communities that way. So, quite aside from the fact that they are maintaining direct employment in other parts of Canada, they can still honestly say, like, hey, we are still supporting your communities one way or another.
There was an old Toronto City councillor, I'm going back 40 years now, maybe more, a little more than 40 years, whose name was Fred Beavis. And Mr. Beavis always used to say, you can't suck and blow at the same time. And I guess that line rings a bit true right now, because on the one hand, Premier Ford, your critics will argue that you can't be the guy who is sort of launching the campaign to get rid of intra-provincial trade barriers in order to make Canada more efficient and sort of obviate some of the problems of the tariffs. And at the same time, when we do gain those efficiencies in the corporate sector, all of a sudden start trying to embarrass CEOs on television because you don't like the fact that they've left Ontario. You can't suck and blow at the same time.
Well, you've also illustrated nicely, like, why did we have so many controls on alcohol movement across provincial borders for so long? Well, because we enjoyed the jobs that they indirectly created, no matter what the costs were to the consumer.
Right on. Okay, and with that, off to issue 3. Well, we were off for the summer, so we're going to do a little bit of a catch-up now on the major developments in a lightning round. Okay, you ready to go, JMM?
Absolutely.
Let's start with your favorite subject. What's going on with the bike lanes?
Right. So back in August, the Ontario Superior Court judge struck down the province's plan to remove 3 bike lanes in Toronto. The Premier, as you might imagine, was not fond of that decision, responded saying that it was the most ridiculous ruling he'd ever seen. This was a decision by the Ontario Superior Court Justice Paul Shabas. He struck down the legislation that the government had introduced that would have removed these bike lanes, saying that removing the bike lanes posed a significant threat to the lives of cyclists, and the government had not, in fact, proven through either data or expert testimony that removals would significantly speed up traffic in the city, would address congestion. That was the stated public purpose of the law. The government couldn't demonstrate that removing the bike lanes would actually do anything to make it better, so he said this was an unjustified infringement of the charter right to security of the person that everybody has, including cyclists.
And what is the status of that court decision now?
Well, the government, you will be shocked to learn, is appealing the decision to the Court of Appeal, Ontario's highest court. The thing I would draw people's attention to is that the ruling is really quite blistering. The judge politely reads the government the riot act, if I could put it that way. They presented very little data to support their arguments. The data they did present, in some cases, did not. It in fact supported the cyclists. The Court of Appeal is going to be limited, at least is traditionally limited, in what facts it can accept, right? So even if the government now wants to introduce new evidence at the Court of Appeal, there are usually rules against that. You're not automatically allowed to do that. So the Court of Appeal is going to have to be careful in its own decisions about whether they give the government a more generous bite at the apple a second time. It's a clunky metaphor.
How many metaphors are we using here?
Yeah. In any case, as much as I know there are lots of people who think that the lower court's decision was nonsense or whatever, it's not guaranteed that it will be overturned just because of the limits on what the government can introduce on appeal.
Did you notice what the Premier did during the news conference in which he excoriated this decision? Because to me it showed evidence of the fact that he is still capable of learning on the job. And by that I mean in previous press conferences when courts have come out with decisions that he has not liked, he has got medieval on them. Like he has gone to the nines going after the courts. And clearly someone along the way said to him, you are creating an unbecoming amount of, what's the word I'm looking for here? You are creating mistrust among the population in the judiciary with these attacks on the courts because, of course, judges can't fight back. When their integrity is impugned by the Premier of the day, they can't fight back. It's just not done. So this time, yes, he criticized the decision, but he didn't call out the judge by name, I don't believe. And he actually, I noticed, sort of calmed himself down a couple of times during the course of his rant in saying, now, I'm not going after all judges here. There's just a few bad apples out there. He was trying to tone it down,
yes,
which I noted was quite different from his previous attempts.
Yes, and those moments of careless talk, it wasn't so much an issue with this decision, but there have absolutely been cases in the past where, particularly when members of this government have spoken in the legislature and they have said careless things in the legislature, like the Hansard gets cited by judges in their decisions. And so if you say something foolhardy, particularly in the legislature, judges will notice that, and it can color how much good faith they're willing to extend to you.
Right. Okay, next topic. Your favorite topic. The tunnel.
They're all my favorites.
Well, true. The tunnel under the 401. Where's that at?
Right. So again, in an August press conference, we got a little bit more information from the Premier about what this still very hypothetical tunnel might actually look like. It would be almost 20 meters wide. This would make it, I think, by some margin, the largest or the widest tunnel the widest tunnel of this kind in the world. 3 decks, one for eastbound traffic, one for westbound traffic, and one for some kind of unspecified mass transit option like a train or something. We also learned from reporting, I believe, by Global News that a variety of options for this tunnel or this kind of tunnel had been studied previously. The government had shelved those proposals. I had to laugh at the detail that 3 private companies had pitched the government on solutions to a very congested 401. And of course, everybody acknowledges that the 401 is like one of the most congested highways in North America.
It is the most congested, I think, by some metrics.
Yeah, apparently, like it depends on how you measure it. I think the 405 in LA, depending on the measurements, gives us a run for our money. But regardless, these 3 companies, they all pitched to the government on solutions. All of them included some form of road toll in their proposals, because that is in fact how you manage congestion. We can talk about New York City again if we want, but I'll move on. The government, of course, has prohibited tolls on Ontario highways, so we won't be seeing that. I strongly suspect we will not be seeing that. So for now, we are just going to wait and see what the feasibility study that the government has announced, what they conclude. As we say, a previous look had dismissed these proposals. Given the Premier's attitude, I suspect that the new feasibility study will suddenly discover that there is merit to this idea after all. But gosh, I hope that doesn't sound too cynical on my part.
You know, of course, that the current Prime Minister of Canada is making his announcements now about nation-building projects and what the federal government is prepared to contribute to. And we know that Doug Ford is lobbying Mark Carney hard to have this 401 tunnel included in those nation-building projects. The first announcements were made this past week. So far, the 401 tunnel didn't make the cut.
No, but actually, if I can add, the one Ontario project that did make the list was the Darlington small modular reactor. And I'm very confused about this, because the Darlington reactor already has its federal environmental assessment. OPG had that assessment. They were sitting on it back from I think the early 2000s or so. Like they've had it for a very long time. The federal licensor, like the CNSC, they have given permission to start construction. The construction of this power plant is underway.
It's undergoing, yeah.
So I don't understand what the significance of this federal priority is going to be.
Other than you can't make an announcement about nation-building projects across the country without having something in Ontario.
Yes. Some people, I was talking about this on Twitter, and some people did say to me, like, the point is to have an Ontario project on the list.
There you go. Speaking of which, okay, Ontario public servants are apparently going to be returning to the office full-time starting in the new year. How thrilled are they about that?
Yes, well, Ontario public sector employees, including those of us who are still full-time employees of the Crown here at TVO.
That doesn't include me anymore.
It does not. We will be returning to the office full-time in January. There has been, well, let me start off with the government's argument for this, right? They say that, employees are more productive in the office. That is a debatable assertion, but that is their argument. And there's also been statements in the past about needing to help support the businesses that thrive on, large commercial employers. I mean, including, like, you can talk about some of the places where TVO employees go to get lunches. These are businesses that have struggled with the work from home status. There have, of course, been lots of criticisms about this move, right? Hybrid and remote work allow for better work-life balance. They are generally, they make it easier for women who we just know statistically they get a lot more of the domestic workload put on their shoulders. Diversity in hiring, we can talk about how people who live with disabilities are better able to avoid difficult commutes and can contribute to the workforce that way. We were just talking about congestion on the 401. Like, what is it going to mean when 100,000 public servants are suddenly back on the roads Monday through Friday, on top of all of the private employers whose lead the government is following right now, right? Like some of the major banks in downtown Toronto have talked about having their workers back in the office full time. Well, it's going to be interesting to watch it all play out. We saw how this played out in Ottawa, though, federally, right? When the federal government ended the remote work policies that they had, it was, I think, I can uncontroversially say that it was a bit of a disaster, right? They had not done all of the planning needed to, for example, make sure that there was enough office space, enough desks for all of the employees. We saw pictures of people working in broom closets, that kind of thing. My understanding, at least from reports and from some of my friends who work in Ottawa, is that in fact, the return to office policy in the federal service is just not being enforced that rigorously right now because they can't. I will add one other point here that I think some of the public service unions have alleged that functionally this is kind of like a soft layoff, that the government is trying to get some members of the public service to simply say, well, if I can't work remotely, there are plenty of people in the public service who they may have joined the public service for altruistic reasons, but they can make better money in the private sector. The government would not consider it to be a huge indictment of their policy if those people left the public payroll and went and found other jobs in the private sector. We will see. I mean, it's also like we could talk about Ontario's unemployment numbers right now. It's not like a great time to be looking for work in Ontario. So we will see how all of this plays out in the months to come.
No, it seems pretty clear that the Premier of Ontario has sided with, for example, local businesses, which really miss the people traffic, and also with, frankly, transit systems, because the Toronto Transit Commission, to be sure, certainly has seen its numbers lower than where they want them to be.
Yep.
And if you want that system to, at the very least try to break even when it comes to its revenue, you got to have more people riding the rails. And how do you do that? Make people go back to the office 5 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think last time I looked at the numbers, and these might be out of date, so I apologize, but Toronto was still one of the last major transit services in North America that was still below its pre-COVID ridership numbers. The TTC really has struggled, and some of that has been the remote work issue. Also, for a few years there, people really did not feel terribly safe on the TTC. Things are getting better now, so but that is absolutely one issue for the government to consider. Considering the province doesn't directly subsidize the operations of the TTC, but obviously the TTC gets a lot of money. So
yeah, we'll continue to watch this story and see what enforcement is like going forward.
Yes, absolutely.
And coming up next, your column, my column. Well, it's time now for our regular feature. You know it, you love it. It's called Your Column, My Column. JMM and I reminisce about the stuff that we wrote for the TVO website, tvo.org, over the past week, where we both like to inflict our views on the people of Ontario. What are you going to start us with?
Right. So there was another Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference this year in August in Ottawa, and TVO collaborated with AMO once again. And this year I moderated a panel on what else? Housing policy. And on that panel we had several people, including Scott Anderson of the Ontario Home Builders Association, who all but begged the Premier to, as he says, lead from the front when it comes to the issue of giving a tax break on the HST for the sale of new homes, right? Existing homes do not pay HST when they are bought and sold. New homes do pay HST. And both Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, and Doug Ford, the Premier, have said that they want to look at either eliminating or reducing the HST for at least some sales of new houses. But Doug Ford's position, at least publicly, has been he's going to wait and see what Ottawa does. And Ontario will match Ottawa. Scott Anderson is like, no, we can't wait for Ottawa. Like, Ontario can move. And so I wrote a bit of a piece just bouncing off of that a little bit, saying, the point of federalism, if it means anything, is that Ontario does not need to wait for Ottawa to move. And I reminisced a little bit about the tale of, do you remember the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan?
Well, yes, indeed.
Yes. So in 2014 or
Did it
thereabouts,
actually happen?
Well, no, it didn't. But this is an important part of the story, right? Kathleen Wynne and Liberals, both provincially and nationally, believed that the Canada Pension Plan was not stable or sufficient enough to guarantee people a stable retirement, and that the CPP needed to be expanded. But this was the last year of Stephen Harper's time in government, the Conservative majority. They were not enthused about the idea of expanding CPP. And so Kathleen Wynne said, well, then the government of Ontario will go it alone. And they passed legislation and they appointed a cabinet minister, and they said to all and sundry, including in the business community, like, this thing is going to happen. It turned out that it did not, because...
But it did not for a good reason.
Right. The Trudeau government was elected about... I did the math in my piece, but it's like 160 some odd days after Ontario passed its legislation. The Trudeau government is elected, and they say, hey, actually, we really like this idea of a CPP expansion. But Ontario had played this role of beating the drum and had set a lot of the parameters that would then inform the federal expansion of the CPP. My point being that even in an area of federal jurisdiction, which is what the Canada Pension Plan is, Ontario, both by its size and let's be blunt, its importance in the Confederation, Ontario can set the agenda if it wants to. And I would invite Doug Ford to do so on matters of housing policy. We are still waiting.
The key words there being if it wants to.
Yes.
Got it. Well, okay. I did 2 columns this past week that I want to talk about, and they both have to do with the passing of really one of the most extraordinary Canadians I've ever met in my life, and that's Ken Dryden. Everybody remembers Ken Dryden as this extraordinary goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens. 6 Stanley Cups in 8 years, 5 Vezina trophies, 1 Calder Trophy as the best rookie in the league, which was kind of amazing because he actually won a Stanley Cup first, having come up very late in the season, and then the following year got the prize as the best rookie of the NHL. Team Canada 1972 goaltender in net for the big game where Paul Henderson scored the winning goal with 34 seconds left. And the only time I ever remember Ken Dryden skating from his end of the rink all the way to the other end of the rink to join in the celebration after that, and then coming to the realization that, oh my goodness, there's 34 seconds left. Get back in net and pay attention. Anyways, I got an email about 6 days ago saying that Ken had died, and it was a complete gut punch. It was a total shock because he had been on the agenda in the last week of June, having participated in a great show that was his idea. We had the kind of relationship where we would talk every now and then, we would email a lot. I've actually gained quite a lot of comfort going over our old emails, which I kept all of them. And every now and then, he'd call me up and he'd say, I got an idea for a show. Or, I don't like what you did with that last show. Here's what I would have done. He was very good about constructive criticism. Anyway, the show idea was, Steve, remember how, 50 years ago, we'd get on an airplane and people would smoke on the plane, or people would smoke in movie theaters or in elevators, and he went through a list of a bunch of other things that as we look back on them now, half a century later, we think, how could we have been so stupid as to allow all of that? So he said, what are we going to look back at 50 years from now and think, how could we have allowed that in this time right now? And I thought, that is a Ken Dryden show. That's quirky, iconoclastic, thoughtful, interesting. So we gathered a group of people and we did the show. And unfortunately, Ken, who had just had back surgery and was really limited in his mobility, could not come into the studio. So we had him on the line from his home in Midtown Toronto. The show was fascinating. I just really loved it. And it turned out that was the last time that he and I ever spoke, because what nobody knew, except his immediate family, was that he was also dying of cancer at the time. And that came as a complete shock to just about everybody who knew him. And I know that because he had, and this now relates to my second column. The first column is what I just described. The second column, which I think just goes up today, has to do with a very intriguing celebration of life that was held for Ken Dryden in Midtown Toronto this past Tuesday. We have seen that when Montreal Canadiens legends die, they get funerals. Yep. Rocket Richard, tens of thousands of people. Guy Lafleur, thousands of people. They open up the Bell Centre. The body can lie in state in the Bell Centre, the home of the Montreal Canadiens. Yeah. Ken Dryden had a couple of hundred close friends and family, and that was it. And they had a slideshow during the course of the celebration, probably 400 slides that they ran through. By my count, there might have been 3 or 4 that related to his life as a Liberal MP and the social development minister who was the first guy to negotiate a national child care policy with 10 provinces, which he was so proud of and so grief-stricken when the Harper government got elected in 2011. He lost his seat, and the Harper government canceled that plan for reasons we don't need to get into here, but they obviously had a different view about a national child care program. So Ken was quite devastated by all that. But what was interesting about the funeral was overwhelmingly the pictures that we saw were Ken as a dad, or Ken as a grandpa, or Ken as a Montreal Canadian. And they were just delightful. The pictures were delightful, and people laughed out loud and they chuckled, and it was just, there was a lovely, warm feeling in the room. I'll share one more item from that column, and that is there was a moment where a lot of the Dryden cousins were at the front, and they talked about how one of the traditions in their family was to have a group hug. And they all did it. They had a group hug right up there at the front. And then they invited all the members who were there in the congregation to have a group hug. Now, you can imagine that under different circumstances, this would be completely awkward and people wouldn't quite know what to do. And JMM, I'll tell you something. Just like at a game, if you're at a sporting event and, section by section by section, people start doing the wave. That's what happened. Pew by pew by pew, people started looking at the person beside them and hugging them. And, it just started to make its way back, row by row by row. And it was really beautiful. And I'm not sure anybody could have pulled that off other than those who came to honor Ken Dryden.
That's really lovely.
It really was. I wrote a book about hockey in, I think 2004, 2005, called The New Game. And it was meant to talk about all the different changes hockey was undertaking in order to be less clutch and grab and more prizing skill. And I called it The New Game because, of course, I think the greatest book about sports that's ever been written was The Game, written by Ken Dryden. And I wanted to kind of pay tribute to him with that book. It's a very sad time because he was so interesting and so different from any other hockey player, so different from any other politician. And at only 78 years old, he was taken from us far too young. Ken Dryden, God bless you. May you rest in peace.
And with that, shall we go to the mailbag?
Let's do it. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, please send it along to onpolitics@tvo.org. And actually, just before we read this week's letter, I want to give a shout out to a couple of folks who I know love listening to this podcast. Spencer McNee, I'm thinking of you. Lauren Cohen in Thornhill, I'm thinking of you. We're glad that you like the On Poly podcast, so a shout out to you too. Please keep listening. Who do we want to hear from this week?
We have an email from listener Robert who sent us in a photo. He writes, "Hi, Steve and JMM. Thought this could interest you. It is posted here in the beautiful town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Best regards, Robert."
Oh, yeah, that's that, right, sure.
Nice heritage plaque.
Heritage plaque, seen that many times.
So the inscription reads, "The First Provincial Parliament, 1792. On September 17th, 1792, Colonel John Graves Simcoe, Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, opened in this community, then the capital, the First Provincial Parliament. The legislature consisted of an appointed legislative council and an elected legislative assembly. Its opening marked the introduction of a form of representative government into this province. Previously, both the French and British regimes had been directed by a royal governor, advised by an appointed council of officials and prominent citizens. The first parliament held all its sittings in Newark, as Simcoe had renamed Niagara, but the second was summoned to meet in 1797 at York, now Toronto, the new seat of government."
Okay, all you On Poly nerds, you got to go to Niagara-on-the-Lake and see this thing. Here's the thing, though. I want to make a clarifying point about this because for the longest time, I saw that plaque in, for lack of a better expression, downtown Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I assumed, because every plaque like that I've seen around the province of Ontario is right next to the thing it is describing.
Right.
So that plaque, I thought, for the longest time was describing the old building that kind of looks like it could have been a parliament right behind it. I later learned, only maybe in the last 10 years, that's not the first parliament at all.
Oh, okay.
So for whatever reason, they've got that plaque downtown, but the building it's closest to is not the actual building in question.
Okay.
The actual old Parliament building is down near Fort George, which is a bit of a ways away.
Oh, okay.
So if you go to Niagara-on-the-Lake to see the Shaw Festival or whatever, do not be confused that the building, which I think it's an old Masonic lodge.
Okay.
That's not the original Parliament buildings. The original Parliament buildings are down by Fort George. That's the building. So now that we've got that straight.
But the old building is still standing.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the first Parliament, the first provincial Parliament in Toronto is not still standing.
No,
it's a car dealership.
now. That's right.
So
Where is
because
that's on
we
Front
respect our
Street.
heritage.
That's right. It's a car dealership now where the original building was. I think it's on Front Street somewhere.
Yeah,
right,
and I think
right
actually
downtown.
it might get turned into one of the Ontario line stations. Metrolinx, I think, was interested in buying it at one point. So we'll see. The city is always changing.
Yes, indeed. But that's my admonition. If you go to Niagara-on-the-Lake, don't be fooled. It's not the old Masonic Lodge. It's down by Fort George. So go take your pictures in front of that building down there.
All right. So if you have any other questions about content on the show or other arguably misplaced historical plaques in Ontario, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, September 12th, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Please write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org and be sure to include your first name, last name, and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Laurie Few is the executive producer of Digital.tvo. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
It is great to be back here in a slightly different place, right? We should
Yes.
should we let the secret out right now?
Sure, we can.
The place where we used to tape this program is in the old William G. Davis studio, which is being completely gutted and renovated for the new show, The Rundown, to come.
Yes.
So we are, I don't know where we are. We're somewhere up on the 5th floor of 2180 Young Street.
Yeah, this show has a smaller footprint than some of the other ones TVO
It does. So we're very nicely, comfortably ensconced in this tiny space, and we want to thank our wonderful technical crew and the team led by Mark Ford, who've managed to move us from the ground floor to the 5th floor seamlessly so.
Moving on up.
Jefferson's reference, I get it. Until next Friday, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.